Hey, what's up, everybody? Chad Calek here, and welcome back to episode 20 of the In a Crowded Room podcast, which on this episode, we're going to talk about the competing Fyre Festival documentaries that were on Hulu and Netflix. I finally got a chance to see both, and I got to be honest, if you haven't, first off, you should see them. They're very, very, very good documentaries, but I felt like both of them should have included more information about the business of concert festivals, big, massive festivals. And I think if they did, you would have known how much of a disaster this thing truly was. And not that they don't present the Fyre Festival as a disaster, they do, but this thing should have never, ever, ever happened. And I'm floored that Ja Rule somehow avoided prison time with this. And I'll tell you why towards the end of this podcast. But first off, if you don't know, the Fyre Festival was a festival that was started by a young millennial culture vulture named Billy McFarlane, who somehow got Ja Rule, the rapper Ja Rule, got him roped into this as his partner. Now, it started out as an app, and the app was designed to essentially bring together talent buyers and performers, entertainers, musicians, athletes, you name it. It was an app that you could basically flip through, find out the availability of big stars, and book them directly and pay them directly, and basically have them come to your event. Now, I assume this was primarily for big corporations. What a lot of people don't know is that big companies like Google, Apple, they often will hire huge artists and pay them many millions of dollars to play small events of 50 to 100 people. One of the stories that I heard a long time ago that blew my mind is that Kid Rock was reportedly hired by Google to play a show for 40 people, which is pretty crazy when you think of how big Kid Rock is, obviously. Now, in thinking about how they could blow this app up and make it a household name, someone at some point had come up with the idea of hosting a concert, a large one-off summer festival like Bonnaroo or Coachella, but they were going to do it out in Jamaica on an island that supposedly was owned by Pablo Escobar. It was a crazy thought. It could have been an awesome thing to pull off, but I think if anybody would have looked at it realistically, they would have known right away that this is a horrible, horrible idea. But let's start in general with the things that they didn't really talk about on the documentary. And I know this because not only have I been a performer that's played these festivals, I've also worked in production on these types of festivals. And the first thing you need to know that's not in the documentaries is that these one-off festivals, yearly festivals like Coachella, Bonnaroo, and that's what the Fyre Festival is going to be, these things are known losers, especially in the first 2 to 3 years. What I mean by known losers is the investors know that they have to build the name of the event before they'll ever be profitable. And most of these types of events will go as long as 10 to 15, in some cases 20 years before ever turning a profit. For example, the Insane Clown Posse does a festival called The Gathering of the Juggalos. They do it once a year. This is their 20th year this year that they're putting it on. To date, they have lost money on 19 straight Gathering of the Juggalo events. Okay, that's a lot. And they think that this year they might finally turn a profit. And that's a 20,000 person event. All right. Billy McFarlane was trying to throw a 5,000 person event out in the Bahamas and somehow thought he was going to make over $26 million. Okay, this is an insane idea. Now, why is it that it takes so long to make money on these things? Well, how these things work is you start with the talent. The first thing you do is you book your talent because the talent is going to give you an idea of how many overall tickets you could sell once you set your ticket price, okay? Now, agents know that when first-timers call, they don't have a clue of what they're getting into. And when you know that, you're going to want all of your money up front, and you're going to charge a ridiculous amount. And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll get to pay 50% up front and 50% the week before the event. And that's got to be guaranteed money to the artist. Now, the Fyre Festival, they were booking like Diplo, Good Music, Blink 182, Migos. I mean, they had these just absolutely huge artists that they were paying 2, 3 times their normal scale, and they had to guarantee that. Now, typically, once you have that, like say, okay, we spent $5 million on our acts. Now, the name of the game is to get everything else for dirt cheap. But you can only go so cheap because there's a level of production and safety that must be maintained, not only legally, but to the artist standard, right? Because a massive artist like Lady Gaga is not going to land at a place that doesn't have security, proper living quarters, food and drink to make sure that everybody's eating well, no one's sick, no one is going to be risking any chance of anything medical happening. There has to be proper medical close by. I mean, there are so many things that go into this, but you got to figure out a way to get all of those things for as little money as possible because you are hemorrhaging money to the artists as a first-time talent buyer. In the case of the Fyre Festival, not only were these guys living in mansions, but this Billy McFarland was just, whatever it took to just throw money at something, that's what he was doing, which is absolutely insane. I want to point this out too. In almost every scene, in almost every single scene, when they're in Jamaica, Exumas, Jamaica, they're always drinking. They're always partying in almost every single scene. Everybody, from Billy McFarland to his media people, to his promoters, everybody, everyone is always drinking, drunk, or smoking something. And I'll tell you right now, they're in Jamaica. Every drug known to man is available. They weren't just drinking, okay? They weren't just drinking. That's the first sign that this thing is going south, is that everybody there is not taking it seriously. They don't realize the magnitude and the scale of what they're doing. So this Billy McFarland is just kind of leading the charge and making all kinds of promises left and right. I've met people like Billy before, and there is a benefit to having that like rah, let's go, crazy energy type of person, but not in charge. I would never put someone like that in charge of anything because they're just not realistic thinkers. Now, again, I'm going to get to Ja Rule and why I think he should have been much more culpable in this entire situation. But let's go back to the Fyre Festival. So right away, they're paying a ridiculous amount of money for acts. They're paying a ridiculous amount of money for all of the things that go into the festival. The food, security, the staging. They're trying to pull off a festival like this in 4 months, when on average it actually takes 8 to 12 months to plan something like this. And they have no idea how they're even getting people to the island. I mean, when you throw live events, 101, make sure you can get people there and take care of them. That was completely disregarded throughout this entire thing. Now, beyond the obvious, which is how in the hell can you expect to have a good event when you can't even get your customers there and take care of them, but how do you build the name of the festival moving forward? And again, the reason that's so important is because it's a known that you're going to lose money early on these things, all right? You need to build your name of your festival until it's something like Coachella. And what I mean by that is every band wants to play Coachella now, right? It's the biggest music festival of the year. And because there's a long history now of working with the same booking agents, the musical acts that play Coachella are not charging 4 or 5 times what their normal rate is, 3 times. They're actually, in a lot of cases, playing the shows for free because they have these established relationships. And that takes time. And they never talk about this in the documentary. That's what takes time. That's how you become profitable in those types of shows. You have to be able to get massive talent for half price, quarter price, if not free, that sells a ton of tickets. And the same thing with the vendors. Over time, they could lean on those relationships too and get better prices. And the vendors also want to make those prices because they know they'll have business next year when it comes back around. So you should never get involved in a business like this when it's a yearly festival unless you know you can go 4 to 5 years deep and foster those relationships and get those prices down until you can finally make money on the festival. Kevin Lyman is the musical promoter that runs the band's Warped Tour. I recently saw an interview with him in which he has only made money off ticket sales at one of the Vans Warped Tours. Of all the Vans Warped Tours that there's ever been, he's made money off tickets on one. Now, he has made money off vendors. He has made money off selling stuff because basically the promoters get a percentage of everything sold at the event. That's the bread and butter. That's where they're going to make the most money. So the idea is get the musical acts, get their costs low enough where basically their ticket sales break even with the cost of production, security, riders, backstage, all of that, and then get a percentage of merchandise and food, and that's where you make your money. Now, knowing all of that now, if you've seen the documentaries, and if you haven't seen it yet, you'll realize how insane this was that they were going about these things in that fashion. You do not need to be flying on private jets to have conversations with people back and forth on islands and back and forth to America. They were living in these ridiculous houses, riding jet skis all the time. And again, they were drunk and high and everything else in every single scene. And what's crazy is Ja Rule was right there with them, partying the whole time. There's this footage that just blew my mind. They're just making these announcements, and they just hired Fuck Jerry, which is a promotional company. And they're doing a killer job promoting this. They brought all these influencers and models out, and they filmed all these commercials about what this festival was going to be. And they announced it, and Ja Rule is doing this toast.
And this is me and Billy's favorite toast. And this goes to all of us in the room. Here's to living like movie stars, partying like rock stars, Billy.
And fucking like a porn star.
To the festival.
It looks like the way you would be acting if you did something and you were then very, very successful and you made a bunch of money. And then you realize this footage is before they ever started making this thing. And the locals knew. In the Netflix documentary, there's a great conversation with this local guy that they were working with that knew everybody on the island, knew how to get the deals, where he said that Ja Rule pulled him to the side and said, "Hey man, is this thing really going to happen?" And he said he told Ja, "No, there's no way to pull this thing off." When it comes to Billy McFarland, there's no question that he should be doing some time. This guy was blatantly, knowingly breaking the law and doing it in such an overwhelmingly arrogant way. He was just being selfish as hell. He wanted the good life before he earned it. And I have a huge problem with that. But what's weird is that Ja Rule knew this industry. Ja Rule knew going into it that these one-off festivals are the hardest damn things in the world to make money on unless you're a long-term investor. And even then, just so you guys know, these Fyre Festival type of events where they bring in a handful of acts for one day, once a year, these things fall apart all the time. I'm going to tell you a story here in a second of a smaller version of Fyre Fest that I attended. But this happens all the time where local promoters just pool their money together and they want to bring in a couple acts and they have these visions of money, you know, they're going to make it hand over fist. And you can't pull something like this off without having a ridiculous team of people in which everybody has to do their job. And the bottom line is there's only so many people on planet Earth that are really, really good at this, and they're getting hired out by the people that do Bonnaroo, Coachella, big events like that. And Ja Rule knew that. So I don't understand why Ja Rule wasn't in more trouble. He was presented and pitched as the co-founder of this fire company. Now, he later said, "I was fooled like everybody else." But no, he was out on the island. He was partying like crazy before it ever started. He was telling everybody to party like a rock star and fuck like a porn star. And the most telling scene is at the very end of the Netflix documentary, I believe it is. After everything goes south and after everybody's in trouble, there's this conference call where basically Ja Rule is on the phone telling everybody, "Hey, I know it went south. I know everyone showed up and it was a disaster," which, again, if you haven't seen this yet, it's a disaster. People were sold these incredible villa suites and they were given FEMA tents. I mean, it's as bad as you can possibly imagine. And they're all talking about this, and you hear Ja on the phone, and Ja says, look, spin it. I don't give a shit. Spin it. Right? You got smart people in the room. Spin it. Figure it out. We can come back from this. We can do this. Okay? And then basically this guy says to Ja, how do we come back from this? How do we come back from the fact that we just frauded this many people? It was fraud. And Ja cuts him off and says, no. It wasn't fraud. It was false advertising. Like, they're not one and the same. It just blew my mind. At some point, Ja Rule should have stepped in and said, listen, my agents at CAA or my agents at William Morris, let me put you in contact, with the guys that do this, that know the people that put these festivals together. Let's hand this over to them. I don't understand how Ja let this Billy McFarland run wild. I don't understand it. There's a difference between doing a bad job versus doing an illegal job. It's not like Billy was just bad. Billy was doing highly illegal things, forging confirmation numbers for, wire transfers. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Everything about this entire festival was wrong from the jump. And I really wish the documentaries would have set that up more, that business is a long-term investment. It's not a short-term investment. And I wish those documentaries would explain that more, because it would have shown even more how insane this whole thing was. And I wish both documentaries would have demonstrated that Ja Rule would have known all this in advance. Ja has played a number of those, festival dates that are huge, that happen every year. He knows the process. And I know he knows the process because I know the process. When I was in 35-inch motor, we used to play summer dates all the time. Our favorite time of the year was to play summer music festivals. And that's because even as a small unsigned band or even a small indie band, you would still get paid 2-3 times more than you ever would at any other show. And you would have a massive stage. You would get all kinds of luxury stuff backstage. You get the best food. Those were always the best shows to play. And it was always very obvious that people were hemorrhaging money to make those types of festivals happen. But as I said earlier, these types of things blow up in people's face all the time. And that's why the agents demand so much money for first-time talent buyers. When Index Case was touring through the upper Northwest, and I was managing them, they were signed to a booking agent called the Agency Group. So I get a phone call saying that there's some guy that has a skate park, and he has secured CKY, Bam Margera's brother, the rock band CKY. He has secured them to play this non-conventional venue, which is a skate park. And right away, my gut is like, oh man, this sounds bad. This sounds wacky. I don't know. It's a skate park. CKY is pretty big. They're probably going to bring 2,000-3,000 people. That means some guy that we don't know is going to have substantial security, definite money sunk into a stage with adequate sound and security. And I'm already doing the numbers in my head as a band manager of how many people would have to show up in order for this guy to pull this thing off. And I think I had calculated it would have to be almost 4,000 people. And I'm like, there's no way 4,000 people are coming to a skate park. So I call the agency group back and I say, what do you think? And he goes, honestly, what I think is it'll never happen. It's going to blow up in his face. So we should absolutely take the show. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why should we take the show? And he goes, because we're doing this guarantee up front. I go, okay. And he goes, so when everything goes sideways, don't worry, we're getting paid. God, the music business is just so fucking dirty. I'm like, so you're suggesting that we take the show knowing that it's going to go sideways rather than turn it down and just avoid it and move on. He's like, hey, it's free cash. So I said, well, listen, go ahead, book the show. Maybe this guy is a great new promoter that really understands this business. Maybe he has the skills. Maybe I'll be, pleasantly surprised by what goes down. So we're about a week out, and we still haven't got our deposit yet. And the deposit's 50% up front. So I called the agency group. I'm like, hey, listen, we got to get our deposit or we're not going to the show. And he goes, yeah, I know. I'm trying, man. I'm trying. It's going to be all good. No worries. They're either going to give it to us or we're just not going. So this goes back and forth, back and forth. And we get just outside Seattle. And I'm like, what the heck? Because there's radio spots. And I'm going, fuck. This is a problem now because we're letting the public know and our fans know that we're going to be there when they haven't sent us the deposit yet. So I obviously flip out, just get pissed off as can be. And I'm leaving this promoter messages basically saying, how dare you, dude? You cannot promote that we're going to be there and be running radio ads when you haven't sent us the deposit. I'm like, no freaking way. Get those radio ads off the air, like blah, blah, blah. I'm just like going off. So the next morning, I find out that 40% of the deposit had come in, and there was some technical reason as to why it wasn't 50%, but don't worry. It'll all be there for us, no problem. And at that time, because the band's touring, they need to get paid every night. So the band decides, well, if we got that much money, we'll go ahead and go and just play the show. And I'm like, oh man, I don't like this. So I decide that out of my own pocket, I'm going to fly up there to be with the guys. So if things go sideways, they have somebody there to help them kind of manage and navigate the situation. So I get up there right away. It's the day of the event. I show up to the skate park. There's a couple hundred kids spewing about the park, just kind of everywhere. Some are hanging out, some are skateboarding. And I'm like, where is the stage? And I'm looking around, I don't see a stage. I can't find signage. I can't find anything saying that there's going to be a show. So I get inside the skate park and I come around the back of the skate park and there's this shed with this stage that's been built out of wood, a couple PA speakers, some lights on a pole, and that's it. And I am like, oh my God, what is this? What is going on? About 20 minutes after that, CKY arrives, and I'm going, these guys are going to lose their fucking mind when they see what is going on here. Which they do. Their touring manager is just like going crazy, blowing up on people. The promoter finally shows up. He's blowing up on him. There's no security. These security are just the promoter's buddies. And the promoter's just saying, listen, it's all good. You guys are just early, which we were technically a little early. He was like, give us time to get it all set up. It's all going to be good. In the meantime, you guys all have free food and free beer across the street at this bar. So we're like, whatever. We're already here. Index case is there. So they're just like, hey, if there's a show tonight of some kind, I guess we'll play it because we've been paid and we don't want our fans to go home with nothing. So they're down. And I'm like, CKY, though, they've got, at least 1,000 people coming. So I decided their situation's theirs and I'm going to worry about it. We go across the street, and by the time the show rolls around, everybody's been drinking. Everybody from CKY is hammered. So we go back across the street, and it's the same exact setup that it was, except now there's 1,000 kids there. And I'm like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So basically, Index Case ends up playing because we had our own PA as well. So we're like, well, we can run our PA in combination with their PA, and it could be loud enough, and we could pull this off. And we had a smaller audience there. The guys were just starting out in the upper Northwest. So the Index Case show went good, actually. The crowd was crazy. There wasn't any security, but thank God Joe just has a very commanding control of the audience when he was there, and that was fine. And I kept thinking, is CKY really going to go on? And they did. They took the stage, and the second song, they blew up the PA where it didn't even work anymore. You couldn't even hear it. I mean, it just literally fried the PA. So they got the PA back on and they just used it for just vocals, and the band just played through their cabinets, and they were all skateboarders anyways, right? So these are all skater kids, so they don't want to let them down. The whole night gets over. Thankfully, no one's been hurt too bad. There's definitely some kids that have been whacked in the mosh pits and that are bleeding and are walking around with blood. And the promoter comes up, and he's like, here you go, man. And he hands me a check. And it's a handwritten check out of his own checkbook. And he was like, you guys killed it. Thanks a lot. And I know right there on the spot, there's not a chance in shit that check is going to cash. And I'm looking around at the numbers in the room. I'm looking what I know CKY got paid. I'm looking what I know he already sent to us. I'm just looking, and I know there's no way this guy lost his ass. So I call our booking agent, which was a fairly big booking agent at that time. And I just went off. I mean, went off about the whole thing, the fact that it was ever brought to us to begin with. And this was a first-time promoter event. This was a first-time promoter event. And this is why you usually charge 2 to 3 times more than you usually would, and you demand it up front. Because if someone has that kind of juice, they probably have investors behind them in a long-term plan to get that money back. And right now you're probably wondering if the check cashed. It did not. I knew it didn't. I knew it wouldn't. When we left, I already told the guys, listen, on to the next city. We're going to get this back through upcoming shows. I can guarantee you this check is not going to cash. And it would cost us more to go after this guy than it would to just write it off and find a way to make it up through further shows. Touring is very, very hard. You have to rely on all kinds of people that have to be great at their job for things to work well, especially the festival business. That's the harder business to make money on. And the fact that Ja Rule did not step in and say, hey, we have the wrong people in place. And the fact that he let 26 million, first of all, they should have never spent $26 million on a single 2-day event. That's so much fucking money. And you find out later on that, most of it was just blown. It was blown on bullshit. It was blown on living in mansions. And they were flying like 200 influencers in. And they were renting out Airbnb homes for whatever people wanted, just to put influencers in so they can just blog and talk about how awesome it was. I mean, this was a terrible idea from the jump. And again, I just wanted to make this podcast because if you guys knew the information on the industry, you would realize that this was 5 times the calamity that the documentaries even presented. And really quickly, the reason I think there was 2 documentaries that was made is because if you look, one's a blame fest. One is about Fuck Billy and the social media promoters being equally as to blame as Billy McFarland and Ja Rule. The other one just goes after Billy McFarland. So why were 2 made? It was a blame game. Anyways, I just wanted to share that with you guys, a little bit of information from my past, a little bit of knowledge. So when you watch those documentaries, if you haven't seen them yet, this will definitely give you a better idea of what's going on. If you have seen them yet, you should find this interesting because it was a monster of a failure. Crazy stuff. Thank you guys once again for listening to episode 20 of the In a Crowded Room podcast. I will be back tomorrow with more. Much love.